Let's just start saying good morning till I get my slides. Very happy to be here to celebrate Smith-Kettlewell Day. Is it day today, or is today the after party? Okay, so this is the after party, which is always better. And also celebrate Smith-Kettlewell people, their scientists, which I've always really admired. For always being, I've always admired the fact that they've balanced sort of basic research and translational research, and they've always been protagonists in the field of vision science. I packed a little bit too much, like all of us, because we're in the post-COVID. You need to communicate a whole lot. We've accumulated a lot, but I'm gonna get through it. I guess the whole section is about trying to explain what the value is of these deep neural networks in trying to understand vision. I'm going to put my few grains of salt, which is a different little perspective. I'm going to try to concentrate on concepts. There's a lot of technical detail, but I really try to convey some of the concepts and then contextualize some of these new tools inside of the historical framework of the Bayesian ideal observer, sort of vision science and traditional tools of vision science and imaging science. Okay, so let me go. So for those of you not familiar, the Bayesian ideal observer has its roots in some of the work from mathematical statisticians in the 1940s, Abraham Wald, and 50s and 60s, a lot of the engineers. And what it does is it posits the algorithm to make optimal decisions in the face of uncertainty. For vision, this is variability arising due to the environment, or also internal to the brain. This came to vision, there's different stories to this, through Horace Barlow, was a big advocate of this approach, and then Bill Geisler, and it sort of has been influential in our field. These are the sort of some of the uses that we've used Bayesian ideal observers. For some tasks, not always, you can actually calculate the upper bound perceptual performance. That means there's nothing that actually exceeds that performance. That's very powerful as a benchmark to compare humans against. It's also being used, sometimes you have differences, you have two conditions and humans perform different conditions and you make an inference about how the brain is better at one than the other. But oftentimes that's confounded with the task difficulty, the information in the stimuli. The ideal observer can actually be used to measure how much information there is in the stimuli. It's been used as a starting point to model human perceptual behavior by incorporating physiological constraints of the human visual system and then comparing that to human. It could be used to shed light on how priors, environmental statistics influence perception decisions, and to assess how well humans combine different sources of information. 40 years of heavy influence, I'm not going to go through it, but I'm going to tell you the important thing about the Bayesian ideal observer is sort of, the skeleton of the basic structure comes from Bayes' theorem, and that's if it's considering different hypotheses, it is actually calculating, like it could be a target present or a face, identifying a face. It considers what's the probability of each hypothesis given the sensory data. In order to do that, it calculates, let me put my pointer, if I can put it, there we go. Laser, that's what I like. Now. Doesn't want to go. Okay, there we go. So this is the crucial thing. This is the posterior is proportional to this likelihood, which is actually calculating how likely, if I assume that this face is present or this target is present, how likely is it that I actually observe the sensory data that I'm actually observing? And it combines that with some prior expectation of a given hypothesis. Okay, here comes the crucial part of the talk. This requires some knowledge of G. G is actually, so to calculate this likelihood, you need to understand what are the statistics of the stimuli. And it has to be, and the only time you know this is if you actually generate sort of the stimuli itself in the lab. So if you have these textures, assume typically being multivariate normal, you can actually calculate this, and it's unambiguous. That is the ideal observer. In real images, you do not know this, okay? And that's been the limitation. So what are the shortcuts in vision science? So sometimes you assume that actually the system has extracted some features, and you start there. These are the features that are extracted. You simplify your stimuli, and then you put the optimal decoder there. And that's been very fruitful for us, but you lose the connection between the features and how they're extracted from the image. Or you can do other tricks, like act on the image and assume some feature extraction, and then actually put a Bayesian decoder. And the problem of that is that you can push, and that's great. Some of those reviews do that, but you can push it so far. Eventually, I contend that you cannot use these models to actually try to apply it to images of Preeti in any day of the day I'm fine her. Okay, these models sort of have a limit. You can pick your features, and that's where the Bayesian ideal observers fall short. If they didn't do that, then we would be running Google, but no, we're still at the universities. Okay, and that's where the DNNs shine, right? So deep neural networks, there were 138 million parameters. These networks can actually do these tasks, and that's why they're a great point of comparison to compare to humans. The pros, they can be applied to almost any real world task, and the cons are there. I'm not going to show how, I'm already running a little bit late, but I'm going to give you some examples of the pros, things where we can actually compare DNNs where the Bayesian observers cannot be compared to, and actually gain some insight about how humans and DNNs are different. And then if I get to it, I'll deal with the cons. The fact that they're difficult to understand and they're sort of black boxy. That's a little bit frustrating. Although the next talks will heavily look at the inner workings of it, and neural networks use them in very creative ways. Okay, so I'm going to have these examples. We'll see how we do. And so the first two are two examples of using DNNs and how they've advanced both vision, I think, interesting ways and highlight properties of human brain. The second one, how it's advanced, it's sort of an applied aspect of vision science, imaging science. And then the third one deals with the con, trying to understand sort of these DNNs. Okay, there's a demo now. Okay, so if anything, if I run short, you're gonna get the demo, and the demo's fun. So you're gonna look for, if you haven't seen this demo, obviously, just do not participate. This typically is gonna work up to the 6th row, then it's not gonna work. Look for the toothbrush and then raise your hand. Okay, raise your hand if it was a red and black toothbrush. Okay, that's a trick question, just to get rid of the subjects that are not obeying. Okay, raise your hand if you saw a green and white toothbrush. Okay, good. See if you saw a blue toothbrush or purple toothbrush. Come on. Okay, okay, so here we go. So you probably found the toothbrush right here, but you probably missed that one. Yeah. Okay. So this is just so apart from being like a great demo, it's the best demo I've ever had. It definitely beats classification images. It illustrates how we actually search by actually using sort of relationships of the objects that we're looking for and the scene. We rapidly process the scene, and we're looking at the spatial scale that's actually consistent with the scene. Okay. If you can do an actual experiment with, and I don't have too many that's an actual giant toothbrush, but I don't have too many of those. So like you can use that with sort of, unity images. And what I'm showing you there is that you can do this in the lab. And yes, the normal size toothbrush and any other object, it's not just a toothbrush, is detected more often than the object, what's called misscaled here is sort of this giant objects. Now here in 2017, we actually tested all the sort of CNNs, object detectors that were state of the art. And that's what we found. So what you find there is that, the way these work is they put a bounding box on the image and they give you a probability. And what you see there is that the probability given for the giant toothbrush, I'm just using that as a proxy, is the same as the small one. Basically, these algorithms don't really they don't really care about scene context. And then in 2020, up to 2021, we did an fMRI study trying to identify whether this happened in the brain for humans. And we tested a bunch of other algorithms in 2021. And this also sort of a very interesting dichotomy between how these CNNs work and humans work. Now, it's a whole talk of why this actually happens. And it's only just this year that we're finding algorithms that are now finally using context. And these are these new transformer architectures. I know it sounds like a preview to a movie. I'm not going to give you the answers. Talk to me in coffee. But this is something that sort of led us and sort of highlighting how humans are different than machines. Second one, a little bit more complicated. Let me go there. Let's see if I can explain this. The second illustration of this that we thought was actually interesting is how do humans and machines follow gaze? Okay, so Laura is looking at me and trying to follow my gaze. I start moving my head and I'm gonna look at the computer, the laptop. A sensible strategy you'd think she'd do is actually wait till my head stops and then at that point, you know, figure out where my head is pointing and then actually move her eyes there. That's in fact not what humans do. Everybody might actually know what humans do. So I'm gonna show you a state-of-the-art, well, it used to be state-of-the-art a few years ago. We were sort of testing new ones. How CNNs also, you know, get a whole picture of it. CNNs are trying to estimate gaze, get a whole picture of the scene. Then they actually estimate the head direction and put a vector, an estimate of the vector. They just mostly use the head direction. Okay, so what I'm going to show you now is there is, I don't know, it's kind of small. Can you see that little orange vector? Okay, that is what the CNN is. It's going to go a frame by frame. That's where it thinks the person is looking at. This is the gazer. And that person is going to look at this person. And there's a white dot behind that. And that's actually the eye tracking of somebody's eye movements. That's looking at this scene. Of course, the vector, you know, the observer is not looking at the vector. I'm superimposing what the AI estimate is. And the way this works, I need to get out of laser mode, I think. Okay. There we go. See. Okay, let's see if I can stop it. So now what you're going to see is the vector moving and the dot moving. Okay, I stopped it correctly. Good. That was because this is the only way. So what is happening? The vector is still pointing not exactly at the person, because that's where that person is going to be looking at. But the observer eye is already going towards the person. So what is it that we do? What is Laura doing? She's actually taking my head information, but she's also using peripheral information about what are the likely locations I might look at. She integrates that and she makes an inferential anticipatory eye movement before my actual head actually stops there. Okay, so the AI is using just the head right now. So it's just, you know, and it just estimates the head direction. What humans do is they anticipate and they program saccades before the head actually stops, the head of the gazer. So this is another big difference between how CNNs are actually working, because they just estimate head. Humans have much more going on. Okay, they make these inferences. This is just combining across observers. I can go into this a little bit later, but this is basically the data showing exactly what I just said, that these saccades are anticipating, they're not just using the head, they're actually using information in the periphery. The human brain is using information in the periphery to anticipate where the head will stop and use that information. Okay, so that was, and this is more data. That was sort of the first example. Very quickly, the second example is actually from a very different field of imaging science. I have to give you a 2-minute crash course on this in this field. So we're gonna, but it illustrates another way of using CNNs that has been really useful to advanced imaging science. So there's some of you know about this, some of you don't. There's a separate subfield of mostly physicists, mathematicians, visual scientists that work on medical imaging science. The objective there is to create images that the radiologist will actually be able to see to be able to create disease. 50 years ago, you have these medical equipments, you create an image, it says, oh, it looks a little bit blurry. Let me acquire it in a different way. This looks less blurry. This is better. There are a bunch of physicists in the 70s and 80s that really thought there's a better approach to this, a scientific approach. We need to maximize the amount of information in these images so the doctors can actually detect these tumors. How do you do that? How do you do this scientifically? They use the Bayesian ideal observer. They said, well, the Bayesian ideal observer guarantees maximum task performance. Why don't we optimize the imaging acquisition parameters so that task performance is maximized? This was easy to done when they were just doing computer generated noise, where they knew all the statistics of the images. As they progressed to that, to actual simulations that mimicked medical images, which have normal anatomy, this whole thing, you cannot compute the ideal observer because you don't have knowledge of that, the probability density function, that statistics. So what they did is the same thing that sort of Bill Geisler and Johannes Burge were doing. Assume sort of the extraction on the image by a set of features, in this case, Gabor's, they could be other set, and then act on an optimal decoder after that. That worked for many years. I worked on this for 20 years, how you could actually optimize medical imaging for simple, what you see to the right are simple patches of anatomical background from mammograms, angiograms, where you embed a signal in one of few locations, and you can actually optimize medical image quality based on that. All of this had tremendous impact on the FDA. So what you see there is actually summarizes all the work. Harrison Barrett has actually been a pioneer of this. He's now retired. His student Kyle Myers went to lead the FDA and put a lot of regulatory rules on how companies had to use these models to actually do preclinical studies to establish that medical imaging systems would actually maximize test performance for radiologists. Now, I'm going to show you very briefly, when we push these models to a task where you actually get a search task where you have a whole breast image that the radiologist is looking at, and they're searching 4 minutes. It's not so bad. I think I'm okay. When you do this and you try to compare those models that we've used for 20 years and they actually succeeded at to radiologists, this is what happens. So again, these are images that are displayed to the radiologist. The radiologist has unlimited time. They're searching, we're tracking their eyes. These are phantoms from the University of Pennsylvania, they're collaborators. There are going to be two types of signals, masses and microclassifications. These are small microclassifications, masses are biggest. These are important for breast imaging. This is what you get. On the y-axis is the area under the ROC curve for the radiologist, their performance. And then these are the two types of signals. So the radiologists do quite well for these images that we presented. And when we do these models that we've used that extract these features and then use a optimal Bayesian decoder with some assumptions, this is what happens now. Boom, they sort of fall apart. Now we hit a limit. They're not doing, we need to rethink this. We need more powerful models. When we use a CNN that's actually used for image segmentation called UNet, and we retrain what's called transfer learning, the last part of the network, we can get things that are now, doing as the radiologists are better. These are for simulated signals. This is not an actual clinical test. These are simulated signals embedded in these phantoms. Okay, so it's a little bit easier. I'm not just, creating AI for medical images. It's a little bit simpler. Okay, so your question is, why are the models failing and why is the CNN doing so well? Let me give you a little intuition. Okay, so let's start from the right. The right is the responses, sort of the decision variable of the CNN for one target absent image. The red is where it thinks suspicious locations are. And you can see the CNN is actually, there's just a few spots where it thinks there is no signal there. So it's a false positive, but it still thinks that there's actually a false positive at that spot, that red spot. To the most left is where our 14 radiologists combined across where they spent their time. What is it that they spent the time? Sort of close to where the CNN actually felt it was a false positive. There was evidence for the target. Look at our standard models, CHO and these are two types of models that extract features. Assume, use Gabor's to extract features and then uses an optimal Bayesian decoder. They're just all over. Why is that? They cannot learn about normal anatomy that mimics the target. So there's sometimes things that look like the target, but a part of normal anatomy. The CNN can actually has all these nonlinear things, all these parameters that can learn that. These models are fooled by all these things in the normal anatomy that look like the target. So that's just a little intuition. Okay. Very super briefly, what is the issue? You're a psychophysicist. You like to write your models. You want to understand them. I know we all have that thing. You're like, these CNNs is a black box like this. So I share that feeling, late nights thinking, what's going on? How the CNN's working? This is one of the many approaches. Others are going to talk about others that we like because bring the CNNs to something we understand. So what we like to use, bring the CNNs, test them on things we understand, what we can actually use a Bayesian ideal observer and try to understand its computational stages. This is like an hour and a half talk that I'm going to do in 2 slides. It's a bad preview, not even. But so just the 2 elements I want you to understand. The first one is you need to obviously I'm not going to go through all the details, but you need to do basic tasks. So yeah, you think that this is going to be boring because you're using a CNN, and this is not a pre-trained CNN, it's a little homegrown, a smaller CNN with 5 million neurons. Oh, that's mine. I'm sorry. That was the pre, yeah, I know. That was the pre-duck. That was the pre-duck. So you first need some simple tasks that you can run the CNN and the Bayesian ideal observer. Then you can actually compare how well does it perform relative to optimal performance. That's already nice. How is it approaching optimality? Okay, I know there's things like the universal theme approximation that says it should always. In practice, you know, there are architectural things that might not guarantee that. And then this last thing is, and this is work that Sudhanshu Srivastava has actually been working on for a few years. The last thing you can do is you can actually start, I'm going to show you you can start looking at every single neuron in this CNN. So this is, they're actually, of all this is a few million neurons, but it's about 180,000 that are actually active. And I can actually look at their properties. And you can do sort of system neuroscience approach. But what I'm showing you there is one interesting analysis, which is correlating each, across 10,000 trials, I'm correlating each neuron in the CNN with a Bayesian ideal observer decision variable at the end. And what you see, and blue is positive correlations, red is negative correlations. And you can see as you go through the layers and you go through things, you can see things are getting more, right? More intense, the correlations are getting more intense. And you can actually start understanding how the CNN is sort of achieving optimality. And then you can tear apart each of these, you know, again, analyze each neuron to actually identify where targets are being processed, where distractors, where cues, and trying to compare that to sort of the computational stages of a Bayesian ideal observer. And we think this, at least, I don't know, but at least if you're a psychophysicist or a traditional vision scientist, this lets you sleep at night a little bit better. Okay, so it is a conclusion. Yeah. So what I was trying to rapidly convey of anything is that, yeah, we have at the top our traditional tools, the Bayesian ideal observer. If you're never a Bayesian, if you didn't like the Bayesian ideal observer, you're not going to use it. You know. But those of us that like it, we should still use it. But I think there is room for these DNNs at the bottom to actually compare against human for these more real tasks where Bayesian ideal observers fail. And then, importantly, I do think that this arrow between DNNs and Bayesian ideal observer are actually tremendously powerful to shed light on what is going on, what types of computations are going on in the DNN. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. We have a few minutes if there are any questions from the audience. Anyone? We're going to hand you the mic so folks on Zoom can hear you. Can you state your name before you ask?
My name is John Z. I'm from Smith-Kettlewell. And I see it's very interesting that one of the image, you compare the score from CNN to radiologist eye gaze, and it's interesting. The pattern is very similar. So I'm wondering what type of data is used to train the CNN. Does it involve the eye gaze from radiologists?
Yeah, the question. I'm hoping I can talk to people. I'm still in the post-COVID chatting mode. So please talk to me. No, it's not trained. It's just it's mostly driven by the fact that it's picking up on similar information. So it's not trained on the eye movement models, on the eye movements of the radiologist. So we are not training to that. It's really trained by the data. So it's really trying both, you know, the CNN is really trying to maximize the probability of detecting the target. It just happens to be that it's using similar features as the radiologist to actually detect the target. The difference
in the, you think the difference in the eye gaze and how CNN present the features are actually contributing to how big improvement they have the score comparing to the radiologists?
So is the question whether the eye movements?
Yeah, so because they are similar, but they are not entirely the same, for sure.
Well, I mean, yeah, the eye movements here reflect, you know, we're taking the eye movements really as a proxy of what a radiologist found suspicious, right? So they spent a lot of time there. And so that's what is the role of eye movements? I mean, we have other models, it's another talk, where we actually have a foliated architecture into a DNN. That's a whole different talk. So, and that's an interesting thing, and we can maybe chat a little bit more.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thanks. I'm Ben Backus. So I'm still not going to sleep well at night, Miguel, because I know there's a neural net that can look for toothbrushes based on their size because we have them in our heads, right? So there's an existence proof there. And diffusion models are generating, you could say, make me a image of a bathroom with a toothbrush on the counter, and it would get the size right on that. So what do you think is going on? How is, for example, knowing the size of a toothbrush implemented? What would you have to add to have it behave more like a human?
So first, diffusion models often get it right, but I have some examples as of last year where they, the elephants are like a little mini, small elephants. I mean, it's a little bit weird. So they don't always get it. I mean, these are good questions. Second, I show it, but I can show you. What about large language models? I did the same image like you to a bunch of large language models. There's some multimodal models like One for All and Oscar. So they're not, it's sort of like ChatGPT, but they can process images. And you can ask them these things. Some of them are starting to get so I tell them, what's the color of the toothbrush? Same thing as, and some of them, one of them, One for All says white and green. And start getting correct. Another one, some of them get it wrong. So now what is algorithm? I think it's really a difference between there were a lot of years that I actually thought about this. What is missing in the object detectors? It ended up being a little bit more boring. It has to do with the fact of how these kernels are very local in the object detectors. These transformer architectures that basically divide the image into little patches, and then actually use all these combinations. Are starting to really learn these contextual relationships. So I didn't bring it, but I have evidence these transformer models, and so I know what's missing. And it's for a long time I thought it was a mesmerizing thing about the brain. Even I'm prone, I'm not prone to that stuff, but I was listening to some provocative ideas on that, and but it ended up being that it's a boring answer, but familiar to us psychophysicists.
Thank you. While they're figuring that out, I have one question. So when you're training these models, you need that ground truth data set. Are there limitations just what you can get and what you can do?
Okay, so I should there was not enough time. So the first comparisons are all pre-trained model. So they're, I don't even have the capabilities to train those models. These are the models because, the GPUs, and so those are pre-trained object detectors. The last part is our own homegrown network that is that we're just creating the images ourselves. So they're just boring, noisy images. We can create infinite amount of those. So there was the first part really were pre-trained models that were state of the art at the time. So they're all pre-trained. The middle part, there was transfer learning. So meaning that you actually get a pre-trained model, and we train the last layers, which is very handleable for somebody like us at a university, and not many parameters.
Do you think you'll get a GPU farm at some point, just so that you can go up to the next level or deeper into the net?
Like all of us, I don't know, but your grad students and even your undergrad students like him, we need more computers, we need more GPU power. The people in computer science are kicking us out of the nodes. So there's always a push, and I'm like, more, we just bought one. So there's always room to get more.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, you get extra time. Technical difficulties. Burning questions.
Okay, Jacob Yates. Question is, can't you just think of certain architectures as learning an explicit, probabilistic model of natural images now? Now you have the prior. So like if you have a diffusion model or a like hierarchical variational autoencoder, that's like an explicitly probabilistic representation now that you can generate images from. Can that just not fit directly into the Bayesian ideal observer?
Well, like, let's suppose the object detectors that right? I mean, you're saying generating images that have the statistics so you can actually learn from them, but ImageNet already has that, right? So like all of these object detectors are actually learning, they're pre-trained, are learning from this huge data set. They already has that image statistics. It's just not picking it up. And part of it is because because of computational constraints, they were using very local computations. They're not using these global computations because that was computationally really expensive. These transformer models are still computationally expensive, but allow you to do that. And they're already these transformer models are picking up on context. Now, the question is, where in the network is the prior? That's another question. Where is the prior represented? Which is, I think, an interesting question. But keep going.
Yeah, I guess I was gonna say, like, some of them explicitly have priors, right? So, yeah. Well, you
put priors into them?
Well, like, so for example, in the BAE, right, you're minimizing the tail of credit match the output of the network to the right? So at the end, you have this kind of latency that is prior.
Right.
Over international limits.
Right. So right. So, but then, so right. So if I understand correctly, one is this, why don't you train the network to actually learn this stuff directly, these priors. And that is a good way to go. But I contend that the way humans learn these things, you're not telling kids learn the priors. They're just experiences, these natural scenes. They're trying to detect objects and they automatically learn these statistical relationships across objects. And that's you're just training the object. You're training just the network to detect an object, and this is what happens with a transformer, and it automatically will learn context without actually explicitly saying, okay, I want you to learn about these statistical relationships. So it comes for free in a way. And that's at least what I think humans do it too. Like, they're just learning all these relationships. Okay, we need to stop. Better computation. They can't wait a month like we used to for a result back in the days, for a simple result. Yeah, they're like, they want it like a little bit faster.
Thank you.